Hello goblins, it's Chris, Eldritch Pipes, here to talk about a couple of things. First off, I'm smoking Chem Byron Ventures' masterpiece, Virgin Engine Overdrive. Which is just stellar. I'm smoking it in the Slender Man, who has been putting in a lot of overtime lately. Alright. Oh, I'm going to tell you about this pipe I've been making. So, I've been making a lot of these Slenderman pipes, as you know. I've been showing them occasionally. And the subject came up about a different pipe shape on the pencil shank, specifically a cutty. So, that's the journey. Here we go. A rather whimsical cutty. Orange Cumberland stem. And she's going to get a sandblast and then be either a chocolate or maybe a light tan, depending on how the blast goes. But last week was a bad week. It is not the first stem this pipe has had. I have thrown away 2 previous stems, which is kind of a record for me. The problem is that the carbon fibre rod that goes through the shank is also the reverse tenon, has a very shiny, smooth coating. And that makes the tolerances very tight. And so the previous 2 stems are just slightly overshot, but that means that they're too loose, and that's no good. But this is a good one, so we're away. Hopefully done sometime next week. That's the plan. So it's time for a new part of the show. I'm still not sure whether to call it It's Your Questions, or It's Your Letters, or Eldritch Answers Stuff. The first one is from a YouTuber, Al Molitor. That's how I'm pronouncing it. If I haven't got my contacts in and I'm sort of gazing at the screen and can't quite see it, it looks like AI monitor, and I think someone's tracking me. Anyway, he asked, how did my tool selection evolve? That's a really interesting question, because the pipe making project is a really curious one. I started off with a wood lathe. That jet wood lathe in the back. And you can get some way with a wood lathe once you got all the bits and bobs for it. You can do a lot. You can drill somewhat. It's hit and miss, but you can somewhat drill on a wood lathe. You can obviously turn. And you can, as I've got it set up now, with buffing wheels and sanding wheels and stuff, which is what I use it for these days. I don't use it for drilling. Unless I happen to get into a very tight spot where the metal lathe is set up for something and I can't use it. That almost never happens now. But it has got me out of a few tight spots in the past. So, the wood lathe was my first big investment. But when you want to level up, you run into a problem because there are a couple of areas of pipe making that require precision. And there's, roughly speaking, there's 3 ways to go. But all of them require specialist tools. You can use... I went the way of... I'm a drill first, shape second pipe maker. And so I went with metal lathe, which is the tool that you need. I'm just getting a pipe cleaner here. But you can go you can get yourself some specialist tools made for hand drilling. And if you want to go that way, you can. But then those tools aren't cheap either. So you have to go, at that point, you've got to spend some cash, unfortunately. No 2 ways about it. But of course, pipe making isn't just about drilling and turning. You've got a whole host of things to consider, because you've got to finish your pipes. That's staining and sanding and polishing, not in that order. So you have to collect bits and bobs at a rate of knots. And then you need some way of... If you're a pipe maker like I am, you need some way to carve quickly, which in my case is like rotary tools. And maybe that's a common route to take as well. And you can start cheaply with a Dremel, as I did. And because you're using them all the time, you'll burn those out quite quickly. And finally use a Fordham, which is a sort of a beast. And I've had for a couple of years, and he just keeps going, that guy. He's amazing. That's the guy that has these sort of like big chunky ends and has a foot pedal. So, there you go. It kind of evolves like that. You sort of buy these big pieces that you need to start. You sort of have to take a leap, and then you just sort of build as you require things. It's an interesting journey. So, I hope that answers your question, Al Molitor. And I got another letter here. Dear Eldritch, what is the deal with Ebonite / Vulcanite / Cumberland / whatever you call it? Love your pipes, you evil wizard. Your obedient servant, Nyarlathotep. Well, Gnarly, you're right. I realised there's an awful lot of disinformation about Ebonite. It's time to clear this situation up. So, right, let's get to the bottom of this. What is Ebonite? What's good Ebonite? What's bad Ebonite? So, my kind of background in resins kind of helps thinking this through. Ebonite is a vulcanized rubber. It's hard rubber. How is it hardened? It's hardened by adding sulfur. And so sulfur gives you the pro of hardening the rubber, so it's useful, you can machine it, but because it's rubber, it's still soft on the teeth. There's also the con, because when it oxidizes, it's the sulfur that oxidizes out and is just the worst. Tastes horrible, looks horrible. So what's going on? The process of vulcanization is when the rubber polymer is bonded with sulfur. And the 3 variables that gets you how hard your rubber is the percentage of sulfur added to the rubber, the heat that the material is, the temperature that the material is heated to, and the length of time it's kept at that temperature. So, what happens when the sulfur bonds to the rubber polymer? It's called cross-linking, which is what happens when you're curing a resin as well. The resin cross-links with the hardener. So, with those three variables, percentage of sulfur, the temperature you heat the material to, and the length of time it's kept at, you can see that there could be quite a lot of variation in that. The percent of sulfur that you add to the rubber is going to give you your overall hardness, and then your temperature and length of time that you keep it at that temperature gives you the bonding process, how well the sulfur that you add is cross-linked with the rubber polymer. Any sulfur that isn't cross-linked with the rubber is just sulfur in the rubber. That's not good. So you want your sulfur, any sulfur that you add, to be fully cross-linked with the rubber polymer. Now, so you could, in theory, have a relatively soft vulcanized rubber if the percentage of sulfur was low, even though all the sulfur had been completely cross-linked. But typically, we've been trained to look for harder rubbers as good quality. The harder rubber meaning that sulfur added has fully cross-linked with the polymer, giving you greater hardness. In other words, interpreting softer rubbers as not being cross-linked with the sulfur as well. It's possible. As users of Ebonite, we don't really know what has happened because we don't know the recipe, if you like, that Ebonite manufacturers have used. I think they might even keep it reasonably secret, their own particular recipe. So NYH, SEM, the Japanese guys as well, are all using their own techniques. Yeah. But then we talk about the quality. What are we talking about? Typically, as pipe makers and pipe smokers, we're referring to different things. I got a rod once from the Japanese manufacturer. Normally they're pretty good, but in this one instance, there was the way the rod had been extruded, there was actually a gap right down the middle of the rod, which is no good, or at least tricky. It introduces a complication, which is less than the desirable, shall we say. So quite often we're referring to its ease of machining, how it looks when it's polished, that there's no unexpected inclusions, that it polishes nicely. And that's what we as pipe makers mean about good quality vulcanite. Whereas as pipe smokers, what we're really concerned with is ebonite that doesn't oxidize too readily. And there's two things that oxidize ebonite. What is happening in oxidation? So, during the curing process, I'm going to call it a curing process, it's the vulcanization process in rubber. The bonds that have been formed between the sulfur and the rubber polymers are now being broken by something. Typically, ultraviolet and sunlight is the worst enemy. If you've ever come across pipes that have been in a shop window, in a display window, and they've got ebonite stems, they're just a mess. Basket pipes, if you've ever picked up one of those in a tobacconist, they're just out. They've probably just been there for weeks. They've caught ambient UV, and they just taste terrible. There's also one other thing that is a big problem, and that's saliva. You have proteins in your saliva that also break down the bond between sulfur and the rubber. And so the worst part of oxidation happens where you put it in your mouth. Now, someone did ask, well, first of all, Gnarly, I hope that answers your question of all things ebonite and vulcanite. But someone else did ask, how can you clean them? And the answer is, at home, without any specialist equipment, frankly, it's difficult. What you're really trying to do is prevent your stem from oxidizing in the first place. How do you do that? Keep it out of sunlight, and once you've finished smoking, you wipe down your pipe. Make sure you get any saliva off. You know, you want your pipe clean, get the pipe cleaner in there, and make sure that when you put your pipe to rest, then there's nothing on it that is beginning to act on the bond between the sulfur and the rubber. I know some people that keep their pipes in boxes. If you keep your pipes in a box, that's really great, sort of completely out of sunlight. Keep it in its pouch, that's another way to do it. Whatever. Keep it out of direct sunlight, and if you can, even out of ambient daylight as well. And your pipe stems will last the longest. And then remembering to clean them after you've smoked them, especially where you've had it in your mouth. And that will do the most that you can do to prevent your stems from oxidizing. Once they have oxidized, and in the end they will, then you have to make a decision about what you want to do, frankly. Live with it is one thing. I know, it's not great. But if you go down the route of starting to sand, sanding is easy. You can pick up some 600 grit paper and sand back to raw ebonite. But then you need to polish. How are you going to do that? If you have access to a buffing wheel, then you're lucky. Not many people do. And frankly, getting your pipe back to a shine at that point is going to be a tall order. Some tobacconists still will do it as a little service, but even the tobacconist I once worked at had stopped doing that quite a while ago. They had a buffing wheel in the back that they no longer used. It's difficult. Ideally, prevent your stems from oxidizing is the best thing. I say that as someone who does not take care of their pipes with ebonite stems, but then I rarely smoke them now anyway. My resin stems are what I prefer, and other plastic stems or acrylic stems as a second, but I rarely go for an ebonite stem now. If you like ebonite, and some people do, they just really like it as a thing, then go for it. You just have to put in the effort of maintaining it. There you go. All right, I've blathered on for quite some time, maybe too long. I'll end the video now. I think I'll be back with a pipe tobacco review next week, but till then, take it easy. See you soon. Ta-da.